Hi, my name is Josh Rossman. Today we'll be presenting a lesson on social studies. The lesson will build off of the previous lessons that we learned, including Introduction to Government in general, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. Today's lesson in particular will focus on the concept of checks and balances, in particular checks and balances in the Constitution and the three different branches of government. This will be an interdisciplinary lesson. The other discipline that we'll be focusing on is a science lesson that teaches the concept of measurements and balances, and we will be making a connection between the two of them. The science part of the lesson will focus on weights, balances, measurements, and water displacement in general. We will also focus on and understand the concept of checks and balances, and students will be able to list different checks and balances that are appropriate for each of the branches of government. Important vocabulary for this lesson is water displacement, measurements, weight balances, checks and balances, powers of the purse, and veto power. Prior learning and thinking that is important for this lesson is actually information that we learned in the previous lesson on the Constitution. In particular, while they learn about the three branches of government, they don't necessarily know why all three branches are necessary. The concept of checks and balances will hopefully make them understand why we don't want the power to be consolidated with one branch, and therefore we have different branches that check the other branches of government. For this lesson, we'll have a trigger that's actually a YouTube video that will be a clip from a pop culture TV show that shows the President of the United States making decisions. We will use that as a trigger point for discussion about if this is actually the way that the government works, if this is actually powers that the president has, and how other branches of government would check the president in this case. The class will begin with the following focus statement. Today we will learn about checks and balances. Each part of the government gets a lot of power. However, we need to make sure they do not get too much power. Checks and balances allows each branch of the government to check that the other branches are doing what they are supposed to. The lesson will be divided up into several parts. The first part will focus on the science aspect, in which the students will do a lab. The lab in particular, again, will focus on measurements and a balance scale where they will get several household items, and they will make a hypothesis about the weights of the different items and how they could balance out the different items. That will segue into the short video about the presidency, which will in turn lead to a discussion about the different branches of government. In particular, there will be group work where the individual groups will list the pros and cons that they feel that each branch of the government has and how they personally think they would be able to check those powers. That will lead into a class discussion into the actual checks and balances that each branch of the government has. And finally, there will be an exit ticket to ensure that the students understood the material that were learned. The lesson will include differentiation for different types of students. In particular, the group work will allow me to walk around and give help to those students that need it. There will also be an added assignment for those students that are gifted students. There's one student who has autism who will also have an inclusion teacher in the classroom on a one-to-one basis. Although the student will be working together with other students, the inclusion teacher will focus in particular on this student. The vocabulary will be taught throughout the lesson. However, those students that need extra assistance will receive vocabulary cards that have all the words listed that they can use and refer to throughout the lesson. At the end of the lesson, each student will give a write-up of their lab assignment. They will also fill out a map, quote-unquote, of the government and a check that each branch has on the other checks, on the other branches of government. Classroom management is an important part of this lesson because there will be a lot of group time, and if not handled properly, this can lead to students acting out or doing the wrong thing, especially when we're dealing with a lab and expensive equipment. I generally have my expectations for group time laid out at the beginning of the year. Students know and know what is expected of them. They also know that they get graded on their classroom work, as well as how they work together in groups. Students who are not working properly generally get a mark that I mark down in my book, and students know that this affects their grades. They also get checks, which can be positive and can be used as extra credit on their tests. There will be various forms of assessments, both formal, informal, formative, and summative. Some of the formal assessments I will have is obviously a question and answer to check for understanding, as well as structured observations during the lab and group work. I will also have a homework assignment as that will be handed back the next day that I will use to inform my teaching moving forward, in particular on whether we need to review the information that was learned about the checks and balances of the government. The lab, which is part of the interdisciplinary unit, will be used as a summative assignment and will count as a quiz grade that will go into their average. That is a supplementary unit, and therefore it will be graded as a summative assignment, as it is not the main focus of our learning. However, I do want to make sure that they learn it properly, and therefore we will use it as a summative assessment. As well, as mentioned earlier, I have a formative assessment at the end of each lesson in the form of an exit ticket, which again informs my understanding of their understanding of the material. Again, my name is Josh Rossman. This has been a summary of my lesson plan, lesson number 4 on checks and balances for the Social Studies Interdisciplinary Unit.